this is the weird thing about Giza, my friend, is that there are things that have gone underground in Egypt that, for whatever reason, Joe, is just off limits to the public.
He did confirm that some of them were spells, and also the name of the pharaoh, Teti, being repeated over and over.
Okay, Owen. Oh, okay. Run.
Timur was a Turco-Mongol Persianate conqueror who founded the Timurid Empire in and around modern-day Iran and Central Asia, becoming the first ruler of the Timurid dynasty. As an undefeated commander, he is widely regarded as one of the greatest military leaders and tacticians in history. He was also renowned as a military tactician whose warfare killed around 17 million people. However, in 1941, Joseph Stalin sent a team of archaeologists to open Timur's tomb in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, much to the shock of the local residents. Upon opening the coffin, the team quickly discovered an inscription. I quote, "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash any invader more terrible than I." Now, within a matter of hours, Hitler's troops invaded Russia. An estimated 26 million people died as a result. In 1942, Stalin ordered that Timur's remains be reinterred back in Samarkand in accordance with Islamic tradition. Shortly after, the German army surrendered at Stalingrad, ending their fight against the Russians. According to those who believed in the curse, it lasted 71 years, from 1945 to 2016. Because the odour of his pet goat named Murphy was bothering other fans, Sianis was asked to leave Wrigley Field, the Cubs stadium, during Game 4 of the 1945 World Series. Sianis was outraged and allegedly declared, "Them Cubs, they ain't gonna win no more," which had been interpreted to mean that the Cubs would never win another National League pennant, at least for the remainder of Sianis' life. Well, that couldn't possibly come true, right? It's just a man with a goat talking nonsense. Well, the Cubs lost the 1945 World Series to the Tigers and did not win a World Series again until 2016. Prior to that, the last time they won was in 1908. Following the incident with Sianis, the Cubs did not play in the World Series for the next 71 years until, on the 46th anniversary of William Sianis' death, the curse was broken when they defeated the LA Dodgers 5-0 in Game 6 of the 2016 National League Championship Series. They then went on to beat the Cleveland Indians 8-7 in Game 7 to win the 2016 World Series, 108 years after their last win. In at number 3, we have the Curse of the Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond is one of the most famous jewels in the world, with ownership records dating all the way back to 4 centuries ago. The jewel is believed to have originated in India, where the original stone was purchased in 1666 by French gem merchant Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. After going through numerous owners, it was sold to Washington socialite Evelyn Walsh McLean, who was often seen wearing it. It was then purchased in 1949 by New York gem merchant Harry Winston, who toured it for a number of years before giving it to the National Museum of Natural History of the United States in 1958, where it has since remained on permanent exhibition. Now, the diamond has been surrounded by a mythology of a reputed curse to the effect that it brings misfortune and tragedy to persons who own or wear it. There are strong indications that such stories were fabricated to enhance the stone's mystery and appeal, since increased publicity usually raised the gem's value and newsworthiness. In 1811, an article was published by the New York Times which gave a list of supposed cases of ill fortune, but with few confirmations from other sources. Jacques Collet brought the Hope Diamond from Simon Frankel and committed suicide. Prince Ivan Kenitovsky brought it from Collet, but was killed. Whether you believe the curse, that's up to you. Coming in at number 2, we have the Curse of Otzi. Otzi, also known as the Iceman, the Simalayan Man, the man from Hauslebok, the Troilian Iceman, and the Hauslebok mummy, is the well-preserved natural mummy of a man who lived between 3400 and 3100 BCE. The mummy was discovered in September 1991 in the Otzdal Alps, hence the nickname. He is Europe's oldest known natural human mummy, and has offered an unprecedented view of Chalcolithic Europeans. Heavily influenced by the curse of the Pharaohs and the media theme of cursed mummies, claims have been made that Otzi is cursed. The allegation revolves around the deaths of several people connected to the discovery, recovery, and subsequent examination of Otzi. It is alleged that they have died under mysterious circumstances. These people include co-discoverer Helmut Simon and Konrad Spindler, the first examiner of the mummy in Austria in 1991. As of right now, the deaths of 7 people, of which 4 were accidental, have been attributed to the alleged curse. In reality, hundreds of people were involved in the recovery of the mummy and are still involved in studying the body and the artifacts found with it. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Curse of the Pharaohs. The Curse of the Pharaohs is a curse alleged to be cast upon anyone who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian, especially a pharaoh. The curse, which does not differentiate between thieves and archaeologists, is claimed can cause bad luck, illness, or death. It has been said throughout history by many authors and documentaries that the curse is real in the sense of having scientifically explicable causes such as bacteria or even radiation. However, saying that, the modern origins of Egyptian mummy curse tales, their development primarily in European cultures, shift from magic to science to explain curses. Now, the most famous curse of the pharaohs was of course Tutankhamun's curse. The belief in a curse began due to the deaths of a few members of Howard Carter's team and other prominent visitors to the tomb shortly thereafter. Carter's team opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, launching the modern era of Egyptology. The first mysterious death was that of Lord Carnarvon. He had been bitten by a mosquito and later slashed the bite accidentally while shaving, became infected and resulted in blood poisoning. 2 weeks before his death, Marie Corelli wrote an imaginative letter that was published in the New York World magazine, in which she quoted an obscure book that confidently asserted that dire punishment would follow any intrusion into a sealed tomb. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, suggested that Lord Carnarvon's death had been caused by elements created by Tutankhamun's priests to guard the royal tomb. Now, all in all, since the opening of the tomb on November 29, 1922, 4 deaths have been reported: George Herbert, George J. Gould, A.C. Mace, and Howard Carter.
Number 5. King Casimir IV. In the 1970s, 12 archaeologists opened a tomb in Krakow, Poland of unknown date. Somewhere around 500 years ago, they think. 1427, King Casimir Jagiellon IV. He grows up to become the Grand Duke of Lithuania in 1440, and then, eventually, King of Poland in 1447. Fast forward back to the 1970s. The Chapel of Wawel Castle. They find a wooden coffin basically rotten, and what remained were only sections of the king's decaying corpse. Spooky. But then 4 out of the 12 researchers who were working on exhuming the tomb passed away the following couple of days. Suddenly this seemed to be a repeat of a similar event that happened about 50 years ago. Yeah. At least a dozen researchers, either working on site or handling artifacts in a lab, began to experience severe health problems, even lethal. Yeah. Talk about cursed tombs. Holy moly. An agreement to examine the historical site was debauched for a while. Excitement for any kind of scientific research due to the strict government in the 1970s, you see. Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, this guy was a huge supporter of scientific research and already studying King Casimir's dad. He was responsible for the decision to open and study the tomb a few years later. And after that, a few years later, he becomes Pope John Paul II. Like, how awesome is that? Guy was woke back then. He was like, nah, science rules, we need to dig in. The story caught the attention of a nation. Before the burial site was exhumed, the archaeologists and citizens all joked that the tomb was cursed and those who continued should proceed with caution. And then 4 of them, well, yeah. I mean, numerous types of mold spores that cause potential health risks to humans if inhaled. This is like the Howard Carter case all over again. Most tombs in ancient sites contain a pathogenic fungus called Aspergillus flavus. Causes allergies, asthma, and likely fatality. Yeah, big stuff. Heavy stuff. Number 4, the Assyrian tablet. As always, dudes, if you like what we do here at Top 5 Scary, hit that thumbs up button, alright? 6'1" height. That's how tall I am, and that's how tall our next curse is, but engraved onto a slab of basalt. 6'1", absolutely massive, and talk about heavy too. Quote, whoever discards this image from the presence of Salmanu puts it in another place, whether he throws it into water or covers it with earth, or brings and places it in a taboo house where it is inaccessible. May the god Salmanu, the great lord, overthrow his sovereignty. May his name and his seed disappear in the land. Okay, yep, no, that's definitely a curse. Sounds like Rush lyrics, doesn't it? I feel like Geddy Lee wrote this. Written by an unknown author, inscribed onto an Assyrian tablet 800 BC. Definitely not Rush then. And again, this thing is massive, but now, unfortunately, broken in 2. One half ended up in the hands of the British Museum and the other Bonham's auction house. Look, I understand private collectors are a thing, but like, can we just have like a non-biased, geographically neutral ancient library that we can all just collectively study? So many that's mine, no, that's mine. Sounds like kids fighting over this stuff, doesn't it? We're all just curious, we want to know. The fragment in the British Museum's collection was found in 1879 in Syria. It was formed in basalt to commemorate a military achievement of King Adad Nirari III. The British Museum has the top of the statue with the image of the knight's head portion. Again, this thing has gone through so many legalities about ownership, like where did we find it? Who wrote it? The carvings show the rulers alongside sacred symbols, the winged sun disk of Shamash, the star of Ishtar, and the thunderbolt of the weather god Adad. The lower portion was put up for auction by a private collector in London in 2014, and in 2017, the bottom half made international headlines. Once again. This time it was at the center of a dispute between its former owner and the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in London. The commissioner apparently was sued by a Lebanese antiques dealer after police confiscated the relic. Yeah, too much arguing for me. Like, just share it. Couple months here, couple months there. I don't know. Just get along so we can study the damn thing. Number 3. Polish King's Curse. In April 1931, in a crypt in Vilnius, ancient Polish queens and kings were found, but they were found with their crowns still on their heads. Yeah, cryptic stuff. It was a royal burial, you see. Described by those involved as the discovery of a century. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. After a massive storm had flooded a crumbling cathedral in Vilnius, they threw down sandbags to preserve the artifacts, but on the night of April 25th, the water had won the battle and the chambers were completely flooded. They followed the water deeper and deeper to the lost remains of Polish kings and queens from the 15th century. Storm of the century, I'd say. Out of place and messy, but definitely royal nonetheless. The floating, muddy remains of Queen Elizabeth Habsburg and Queen Barbara Radziwiłłona. Royalty. Not meant to be really floating around in the rainwater, you know? Now, after these discoveries, that's when things get creepy. That's when the talks of a so-called curse began. Those involved in the findings began to die in unusual circumstances. Professors falling down elevator shafts, 2 having undisclosed medical issues, 1 professor becoming paralyzed in an accident, Professor Julius Klaus died from an unusual illness. Like, scary. Even a sculptor involved died when untying his shoelaces. That sort of stuff. Like creepy curse stuff. Even if you try and protect the remains of lost kings and queens and their history, even if you're involved, the curse apparently will get you. These curses are heavy, dude. These people were just trying to help and preserve this stuff, but royal curses are royal curses. Spooky stuff. Number 2, fairy forts. So apparently fairy forts in Ireland are a thing. A very respected and very old thing. This is awesome and equally terrifying. Something about a big burly Irishman saying, "Oh, you don't go messing around them fairy mounds now, son." Like, that's horrifying. I'm surprised there isn't more indie Irish horror movies about these things. Serious business. More than 45,000 of them still surviving, and approximately 10,000 destroyed since the first large survey in the 19th century. In County Clare, locals protested the path was through an ancient fairy bush, or a fairy mound. So be careful if you live in Ireland, because apparently an ancient curse of Tara has been unleashed by the destruction of a fundamental ancient fairy fort. Traditional myth and local legend says interfering with fairies' homes is to risk your own life, with most believing strongly in the curse of Tara, the retribution of fairies on those involved in the disturbance of their natural home. In this case, the M3 motorway. Yeah, the N22 is the main road between Killarney and County Kerry and Cork, Ireland, otherwise known as the Emerald Isle. Associated with fairies for more than hundreds of years, dating back to the Iron Age and beyond, when the country was said to be under the power of the mystical Tuatha De Danann, a race of supernatural beings which were kind of like gods. In June 2007, Minister for the Environment Dick Roche signed an order destroying the Lismullen Henge. Lismullen Henge was a 4,000-year-old astronomical observatory and place of worship, once hailed as one of the most important archaeological finds of the century. And, of course, bad things followed. Surveyors held up by an armed gang, the Minister for Transport sucked out of a helicopter when the door mysteriously fell off, the Chief of Health and Safety Officer was struck by a falling tree. Hey, how about we listen to this ancient Irish lore and not around, huh? Also, it's a road. You can't build a little curve around a 4,000-year-old monument? Really? Come on, people. Number 1, Fiscius and Porcello. 2 cursed 1,600-year-old lead tablets in the Museo Archeologico Civico di Bologna were recently deciphered. And one of them turns out to be one of the first known surviving curses directed at a Roman senator. Uh-oh. That can't be good. This one's a juicy one. Well, these two, because it's a pair of lead curse tablets. First off, how much must you have someone off before they get a big rock and start chipping and chiseling away at it for like 4 years straight? Like, if you're still mad after a day of chiseling rock or metal, it's serious. Usually a couple of deep breaths in about 5 minutes gets you over anything. But like, you know what I mean? Just anger. A drawing of a snake-headed deity, possibly Hecate, the goddess of the underworld, crossroads, and sorcery, with her arms crossed and a star carved over her. Although her name is not mentioned, the phrasing of the invocation is similar to the other curses that enlist Hecate and their dark curses. The crossed arms symbolize the binding of the deity to the curse. The goddess will remain bound until its terms are fulfilled. This is what it says. Quote, "Crush, kill Fistus the senator. May Fistus dilute, languish, sink, and may all of his limbs dissolve." Okay, it's a little harsh, no? The other lead tablet, cursing Porcello, has a little less violence, but still, yeah, pretty hateful. The cursed person's named Porcello and his wife Morelia. Same snake-headed deity with crossed arms, but this time, Porcello gets a drawing too. He's portrayed as a wrapped mummy with his arms crossed and his name written on both of them. Quote, "Destroy, crush, kill, strangle Porcello and Morelia. Their soul, heart, and buttocks, liver." Again, what did these people do? Like, liver? That's so specific. Unfortunately, we don't know where they came from. They were acquired by the museum in the 19th century, then forgotten about until about their rediscovery in 2009. The museum has no specific record of acquisition of the tablet's provenance. They could be anywhere from the late Roman Empire. Yeah, anywhere. The two curses, mainly written in Latin and inscribed on thin lead, would have been created by two different people in the late life of the Roman Empire. They both lay at the Museo Archeologico Civico in Italy. Yo, I don't want to get dissolved. People are saying dissolved a lot, you know? That's really harsh. This curses, man. Serious stuff. Number 5, Mirror, Mirror. Starting off this list, we arrive at somewhat of a tame curse. I mean, not tame, because I've hit nothing but red lights for the past month since I broke mine. We've all broken a mirror or two, haven't we? Little hand mirror here or there. Apparently breaking some melted liquid sand can get you in some pretty hot water. Almost everybody has heard of breaking mirrors. Pretty well dooms you to at least 7 years and of bad luck. We've all done it. It happens. Well, apparently it's an old curse. This one's origins begin in ancient Rome. The Romans believed that the human soul would renew every 7 years, repairing whatever damage they had suffered during that time. They also thought that a mirror's reflection was a way to look inside said soul. So what they thought was, if you break a mirror, you break a little bit of your soul as well, which would then again have to go through this 7-year cycle to renew and cleanse that bad aura right out of you. Yeah, do this for 7 years as your soul is reborn. You endure misfortune because of your imperfect, now shattered soul. Sounds like a bad breakup. Mirrors were not cheap either back then, and they were pretty low quality and easily breakable. In order to avoid negligence to the owners, it was also known that breaking a mirror and the whole 7 years of bad luck thing was also a simple scare tactic. I'm not making any more mirrors. You know how much work that is? Like, if you break it, you buy it, pal, and 7 years of bad luck too. I don't know, just, it's hard. These take a long time to make. Next time, just watch your hands, please. Number 4, St. Anne's Well. As always, if you like what we do here at Top 5 Scary, hit us up with a like. A little spot my family likes to call home. Liverpool, England, and also one of the newest reasons that I'm never revisiting again. In 2016, archaeologists uncovered an ancient well near Liverpool that dates to the medieval era. Archaeologists say that they rediscovered a large sandstone well on a private farm in Liverpool. When archaeologists arrived at the site, there was barely anything of a well, as it had become completely filled with earth for hundreds of years. The cult of St. Anne was once a widespread medieval following. The mother of the Virgin Mary, Anne, is often associated with great and powerful healing wells. Anne supposedly bathed in the well, which was known for treating skin and eye diseases. Like OG LASIK, you know, just hop right on in, cataracts gone in a flash. Apparently for centuries, a priory of 12 monks tended to the well mid-16th century, and there was a huge competition and demand for this hot spring. The priory's father and his neighbor both claimed ownership. He's being snide, isn't he? He's being a snide one. Classic case of Darcy versus Delwaney. 2 days later, King Henry VIII shows up, and after all the talk with his men, they seized the well and both dudes lost out. Scouse his luck, mate, go on, scouse his luck. Apparently lore goes, Delwayne cursed Darcy, and according to legend, Delwayne then dropped dead on the spot. Talk about karma, dude. Within 3 months, Darcy's son had passed away from unknown illnesses as well as Darcy losing his job. And a year later, Darcy was found at the bottom of said well. Despite the grim legend, the well continued to be used even after the lore had become widespread. It actually made it more popular. It was purposely buried, but then recently discovered, restored, and reinforced. I only do the wishing wells. You know, those are the only wells that I do. They're the nice kind. Number 3, the Knights Templar. Everybody knows about the superstition about the number 13. Supposedly unlucky. Dude, I lived on the 14th floor for like 3 years. Lights always flickered. Always. Just saying. We're also familiar with the Friday the 13th being unlucky and not just a banger of a Halloween movie. But not a lot of people know where this 13 thing actually originates from. In the early 14th century, King Philip of France was at war with the English. There was this really rich group called the Knights Templar, and after funding King Philip's side of the war, he didn't really have any intention on paying them back. Yeah, you see, the Knights Templar had become a powerful organization in Europe. The most powerful. During the Crusades, King Philip needed supplies and revisions. Never intending to pay them back, of course, Philip doubled down, conspiring with Pope Clement V, who, on Friday, October 13th, 1307, led an ambush, seize, mass arrest of the Knights leader Jacques de Molay and all of his men. They were all charged and imprisoned. He was tortured, imprisoned, and burned at the stake. However, before dying, Jacques de Molay cursed both enemies, claiming that both Clement and Philip would be dead within the year and that their names would be forgotten. Clement succumbed to a fatal disease. Philip died of a stroke, like right after each other. By 1328, all of Philip's sons and grandsons had perished from rapid illness, and the curse had sprung true. Yeah, I wouldn't cross the Navy SEALs of the medieval times. Probably not a good idea. Now I got flickering lights because you two backstabbed a cult army for doing something nice for you? Shame on you. Number 2, the Pella tablet. In 1986, archaeologists unearthed a cursed tablet during excavations of the ancient Macedonian capital of Pella. Archaeologists uncovered 1,600 Greek cursed tablets since then. However, the Pella tablet is still by far the oldest, and apparently the most cursed. Created somewhere between 400 and 350 BC, the Pella tablet is a letter to the gods asking them for help to curse a woman who stole her man's heart. And not like a sappy mixtape or anything, this curse is inscribed on lead scroll. It's metal paper. The writer, one who calls herself Dybbuk, calls upon divine powers from the gods to solve her problem. Her beloved, Dionysophon, is on the verge of marriage to another woman. Dybbuk wants him to herself, of course, and then asks the gods for some help. The language on the stone is so old that it actually predates the modern and ancient Macedonian language. These cursed tablets, or spell scrolls, were called katatismoi, or deficciones, and it was widely believed that they would continue to work and curse as long as the text and tablet existed. Basically, as long as there's batteries in there, it's gonna keep on cursing. James L. O'Neill from the University of Sydney interprets the translation of the ancient text as, quote, "Forbid by writing the ceremony and the marriage of Dionysophon and Thetima, and all other women, and widows and virgins, but especially Thetima. And I assign them to Macron and the Daemones. And whenever I shall unroll and read this again after digging it up, then Dionysophon may marry. But not before. May he not take any wife but me, and may I and no other woman grow old with Dionysophon. I am your suppliant. Pity me, dear Daemones, for I am weak and bereft of all friends. But protect me so this does not happen and evil Thetima will perish evilly. But may I be fortunate and blessed." Whoa, for never was a story more woe than this of Thetima and her Dionysophon. I think it sounds better than Romeo and Juliet. What do you think? I mean, that's not very nice to wish there, Dybbuk. Kinda mean if you ask me, and very jealous. Also, Thetima, girl, you gotta split. This girl's out here looking for you. You're gonna catch some hands for talking to someone else's man. I'm just saying, you've been warned. Number 1, the Björketorp runestone. Of course, the number 1 spot, Björketorp runestone. I had to. I just did my ancestry and apparently I'm 12% Viking. Yeah, I just sent my spit somewhere and they told me that. This specific cursed runestone is one of the many megalithic standing stones located in Sweden. This one actually is one of the world's tallest as well, measuring 4.5 meters high. It's part of a stone circle with 2 other blank standing stones. Scholars date the runestone's inscription to the 7th century AD. It's carved with a type of rune that form an intermediate version between the elder Futhark and the younger Futhark. The runestone is inscribed on both sides. The short message reads, "I foresee perdition," and the longer side translates to, "I, master of the runes, conceal here runes of power, incessantly plagued by maleficence, doomed to insidious death. Is he who breaks this monument. I prophesy destruction." A little aggressive, bro, but I guess, they were Vikings, so aggression was kind of their thing. Local lore says that the curse came true at one point. Long ago, a man wanted to move the runestone so that he could have more room to farm, so he piled wood around it in an attempt to heat the stone and then crack it with water. As soon as he lit the fire, the man's hair lit aflame. His clothes were soon engulfed, and the man perished right there next to the ruin. Yo, I would just avoid these at all costs. Like, no point should you ever be trying to move an ancient Viking cursed megalith. Again, unless you're Kratos helping Loki climb a mountain.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Annabelle doll. We'll kick today's list off with a top 5 favorite. I can't begin to count the amount of times Annabelle has been brought up in our lists. From lists detailing horror movies, creepy dolls, the exploits of the Warrens, and more, this Raggedy Ann from hell is feared around the world. Apparently for good reason, too. You don't make a hyper-successful horror movie franchise based on real events without some real events, right? So what's so scary about the Annabelle doll anyways? The real-life one looks pretty much nothing like the porcelain nightmare depicted on the big screen. Why would people be so afraid of a fabric doll with a big smiling face? Well, you'd have to go back to the origins of the rumors of cursedness. Back in the 1970s, a couple of young nursing students started noticing some strange happenings around their house. After receiving a doll as a gift from one of their mothers, it seemed like a dark energy permeated their home. Annabelle came from an antique shop, and before that, nobody seems to have any history on the thing. But once it dropped into the lives of Donna and her roommate, things got really weird. At first, it was just little stuff. The doll would move around when nobody was looking, often changing its pose when people were home or totally changing locations if no one was around. Creepy, but not terrible. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning. Annabelle then started leaving creepy notes around for Donna to discover, often with messages like, "Help," scrawled into scraps of paper. They called in a medium who did seem to think that there was evil within the doll. Before they could do much else about it, Annabelle even wounded a guest who stayed on the couch one night. This led to an exorcism of the doll, which didn't seem to work. Of course, the girls wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible, so the Warrens decided to take the doll with them. For years, Annabelle was kept in a glass enclosure, complete with warning label. The curse might still be there, but in a room full of restrained curios, there isn't as much Annabelle can get up to these days. I'm sure if she does eventually get moved elsewhere, more trouble will begin. Coming in at number 4, a phone number. It's hard to imagine something like a curse being associated with a simple string of digits, right? A phone number is just a sequence of numbers leading to a destination after all. But apparently a very specific 8-filled number has caused misfortune for all those who claim it. If you end up on a new phone plan in the near future and notice too many octuples, ask for a different one. It could very well save your life. Now, that's not to say that any phone number with a bunch of 8s in it is gonna kill you. But Mobitel, a telecom company, had to nix one of their numbers after a bunch of terrible things happened to those in possession of it. 0888 888 888 was the string of digits in question, and it seemed like it caused a lot of problems. First, a former Mobitel CEO had it. He ended up dying of cancer at 48 in 2001. Rough start, but it could just be an unfortunate coincidence. But next, a Bulgarian mob boss took the number. Soon afterwards, he was killed by an assassin. So maybe there is something to this after all. Finally, a businessman became the keeper of this number. All seemed well for a little bit, but this dude actually ended up getting shot outside of a restaurant. So unfortunate ends for all of them. After that last death, Mobitel took the number out of circulation altogether. They never gave a straight answer as to why either. Maybe they just wanted to avoid getting caught up in rumors about curses, it's bad for business. Or maybe the curse was getting too real and they didn't want more blood on their hands. Coming in at number 3, we've got King Tut's curse. Now for some truly legendary curses, we have to go way back in time. Maybe folks back then knew something we don't, because it seems like these curses are much more powerful and long-lasting than the ones we're more familiar with today. Or maybe superstitions just held more sway before widespread communications technology was available. I guess we'll never know for sure. But yeah, ancient Egyptian curses have been a very popular topic for quite a while, likely especially influenced by the archaeologists who opened King Tut's tomb. Back in 1923, a British team of archaeologists found and popped open the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Inside waited priceless treasures, from precious metals and gemstones to a chariot to a coffin made of solid gold. However, this hidden tomb was also said to contain a terrible curse. This did not prevent the archaeologists from cataloging all the treasures though. At first, it seemed like they had all avoided the curse, but 2 months after the discovery of the tomb, the team's sponsor died from a bacterial infection. At that point, people started taking the curse a little more seriously. It would get brought up every time one of the team members died from that point on, leading many to believe that the curse was real. This kind of dark, vengeful magic was then forever associated with any sort of ancient Egyptian discovery. And of course, plenty of movies were made propagating this idea. Hell, someone even claimed that the Titanic hit the iceberg because of the mummy's curse. Coming in at number 2, the Dybbuk box. This is one that has actually received quite a bit of attention as of late. The Dybbuk box is an old wine box said to contain a hateful demon from Jewish mythology. These demons love to possess people and ruin their lives, and in fact it was the inspiration for the movie The Possession, where a Dybbuk box does just that. It gained some traction back in 2001 when a man bought the box from an estate sale and claimed that it had once belonged to a Holocaust survivor. After he purchased it, he began having terrible nightmares and witnessing strange events around his house. He sold it on eBay, which raised the box's profile and got a lot of people interested in the curse. Currently, it is on display in Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, which kind of detracts from its cursed reputation if I'm being honest. Once an item like this becomes a sideshow, some of that allure is lost. But apparently it was the star of an episode of Ghost Adventures Live, and Post Malone decided to see what it was all about. The musician touched the box and claimed to have paid the price ever since. He says he heard the voice of a little girl upon touching it and ran away soon after. The next day, after encountering a dark shadowy figure, Post Malone sent Baggins a picture of a giant bruise on his arm. Could the Dybbuk from the box be looking to possess a pop star? I guess we'll find out in due time. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Hope Diamond. Every person who has laid claim to this diamond over the years has fallen victim to a terrible fate. It's a priceless gemstone, rumored to have been stolen from an ancient statue deep below a mine in India. Of course there's gotta be a curse attached with that kind of story. See, the original thief that is said to have stolen it is also rumored to have died a horrible death. Then, every person who's come into contact with it has perished in gruesome, high-profile ways. From committing tragic suicides to being torn apart by angry mobs to having their head chopped off, the Hope Diamond brought despair wherever it went. There is even the case of someone being killed by wild dogs for owning the gem, which is pretty wild. Eventually, the diamond made it into the hands of Harry Winston, who decided he'd seen enough. He wasn't gonna hold on to this famous gem and wait for tragedy to befall him, so he donated the diamond to the Smithsonian, which is where it still resides today. But that wasn't quite the end of it. Unfortunately, the mailman who delivered the diamond to the museum got in a car accident, crushing his leg and injuring his head. So even when it was on its way to a charitable place of rest, the Hope Diamond caused one last bit of trouble. Maybe a great deal of the tragedies befalling those who owned the Hope Diamond came about because of their rich and famous lifestyles, but it is odd that so many strange events occurred around the gem for so many years. Thankfully, most of these curses are locked away or largely inaccessible to the average individual. It's hard to accidentally come across a curse these days, despite what the movies might tell you.
Number 5, King Tut. The Curse of the Pharaohs, or the Mummy's Curse, is a curse alleged to be cast upon anyone who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian, especially a pharaoh. This curse, which does not differentiate between thieves or archaeologists, is claimed to cause bad luck, illness, or death. The tomb of Tutankhamun, or King Tut for short, was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 by excavators led by the Egyptologist Howard Carter and his friend George Herbert, otherwise known as Lord Carnarvon, more than 3,300 years after King Tut's death and burial. Whereas the tombs of most pharaohs were plundered by grave robbers in ancient times, Tut's tomb was hidden by debris for most of its existence and therefore not extensively robbed. The unexpectedly rich burial consisted of more than 5,000 objects, many of which were in a highly fragile state, so conserving the burial goods for removal from the tomb required an unprecedented effort. It thus became the first known, largely intact royal burial from ancient Egypt. To date, the discovery of the tomb is widely considered one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of all time. The opulence of the burial goods inspired a media frenzy and popularized ancient Egyptian-inspired share designs with the Western public. To the Egyptians, who had recently become partially independent of British rule, the tomb became a symbol of national pride, strengthening Pharaonism, a nationalist ideology that emphasized modern Egypt's ties to the ancient civilization, and creating friction between Egyptians and the British-led excavation team. Just 2 months after opening the tomb to the public, George Herbert was dead of red body fluid poisoning from a mosquito bite on his cheek. Several people, such as the author Marie Corelli and a psychic known as Cairo, claimed to have warned George of mortal peril before his death. Arthur Weigel, a former Egyptologist who served as the Daily Mail correspondent on the tomb, said he had observed George joking as he entered the tomb and remarked, "If he goes down in that spirit, I give him 6 weeks to live." George's son and heir, Henry, said that Cairo suffered a power outage at the moment of his father's death, and in England, his father's dog let out a howl and died at the same time. Another such story, recounted by those involved in the excavation, involved a canary that Howard Carter had bought at the beginning of the digging season. Initially, the Egyptian workmen regarded the bird as a sign of good luck, and when the tomb was discovered, they dubbed it the Tomb of the Bird. When a cobra entered Howard's house and ate the canary, the Egyptians then called it an ill omen, relating the intruding animal to Uraeus, the protective cobra emblem on the brow of King Tut's statues. When George A. Gold, who had visited the tomb, died the following May, his death was also attributed to the curse, as was that of Aubrey Herbert, George's half-brother, in September. Later additions to the list of cursed deaths included those of Mace in 1928, George's secretary Richard Berthel in 1929, and Weigel in 1934, along with Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who examined the mummy. And still for others, a slew of bad luck awaited them. Howard's friend, Sir Bruce Ingram, had his house burned down and later fled, thanks to a gift he was given that came from the tomb. Honestly, this is enough for me to never want to disturb a tomb in my lifetime, but let's move on and strengthen my argument. Number 4. Tamerlane. In June of 1941, Mikhail Gerasimov, a Soviet scientist, wanted to dig up the conqueror Tamerlane to reconstruct his face. That was his kind of thing as a doctor. He pioneered the field of paleoanthropology, which is just a very scholarly way of saying reconstructing the dead. Hey, it's a lot better than what a lot of other doctors were specializing in at that time. Local residents and Muslim clergy tried to stop the excavations, but the expedition continued its work despite everything. Tash Mohammad Kariniyazov was the leader of the expedition, which, other than Mikhail, also included the writer and historian Sadrian Aini, the famous Orientalist A. Semenov, and M. Gerasimov, along with a young cinematographer by the name of Malik Kayumov. These excavations were mainly aimed to examine the human remains in the tombs and to prove that they belonged to Tamerlane and his closest relatives. The group first opened the tombs of Ulugh-Bek's son and then the tomb of Timur's sons, Miran-Shah and Shahrukh. On June 18th, they discovered the remains of Ulugh-Bek, the grandson of Timur, and on June 19th, the heavy gravestone was taken from the Tamerlane's tomb. All this was done while ignoring 2 consecutive warnings on the tomb itself. The first warning was inscribed in plain sight and well known, saying, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." The second was a surprise, hidden within the tomb itself, reading, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Well, finally on June 20th, the tomb of Tamerlane was opened, and the mausoleum was filled with a sharp, choking odor of the mixture of resins, camphor, rose, and frankincense. It should be noted that Timur died in Otrar on his way to China, so to be buried in Samarkand, he had to be embalmed. 3 days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded Russia. Few would argue that the evil German dictator would qualify as an invader more terrible than Tamerlane. Those that dispute the curse point out that Operation Barbarossa was already planned and underway before the invasion of Russia. Of course, sure, you can argue that. But you also have to note that in 1942, when the body was finally returned and buried with full Islamic rites, the Battle of Stalingrad changed the course of the war for the Russians. Number 3. Casimir IV Jagiellon. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that again. The first time was bad enough, so from here on out he will be referred to as King C for my ease of being. Poland has a bit of a broken and weird history as a nation, but one of their brightest eras came thanks in part to King C. Under his reign, he famously subdued the Teutonic Knights once and for all, and fought hard to retain the union between Poland and Lithuania, all the while recovering lost lands taken from previous kings. His efforts were largely successful, thus ranking him as one of Poland's most notable leaders. King C was eventually interred at Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. The tomb is a late Gothic masterpiece made from mainly red marble from Adnet, near Salzburg. It is composed of a sarcophagus, over which was sculpted a canopy and supported by ornate arches. The inside of the canopy was lined with limestone and includes a late Gothic crown. The nature of the sculpting of the crown and arches echoes the ornate carving of wooden altarpieces at the time. The arches are supported by marble pillars, the capitals of which feature biblical scenes. A full-length sculpted effigy of Casimir lies on top of the sarcophagus, and it's an unusual depiction. King C is presented as being in agony and is dressed in a clerical cloak only used at coronations. The sides of the sarcophagus bear the arms of King C's kingdoms and territories. In 1973, a group of archaeologists and researchers were eager to figure out more about the king's death nearly 500 years after his funeral, and they dug right in and opened it up like a Kinder egg. Unfortunately, things didn't go well for the excavation team. Unearthing the king under Wawel Chapel was easy enough, but it's the examination that started to claim so many lives. Even as it was in progress, those involved started to die from strokes and infections, and within days, 4 were dead. Within years, around 15 were dead. While it has since been proven that it was a fungus inside the coffin that was the cause of death, there's always a possibility that maybe, just maybe, it was something more sinister. Curses don't always have to present as a mysterious unknown. They can have explainable science behind them, for crying out loud. Number 2, Nostradamus. It's not surprising that the man who could predict the future sought to protect his resting place with a curse as well as a prediction of when his tomb would be raided. After all, nothing about Nostradamus is ever complete without a good prediction or two. So he was a French astrologer, apothecary, physician, and reputed seer, best known for his book Les Prophéties, which was published in 1555 and is a collection of 942 poetic quatrains allegedly predicting future events. Nostradamus' father's family had originally been Jewish, but had converted to Catholic Christianity a generation before he was born. He studied at the University of Avignon, but was forced to leave after just over a year when the university closed due to an outbreak of the plague. He worked as an apothecary for several years before entering the University of Montpellier, hoping to earn a doctorate, but was almost immediately expelled after his work, which at the time was forbidden by university statutes, was discovered. He first married in 1531, but his wife and 2 descendants died in 1533 during another plague outbreak. He fought alongside doctors against the plague before remarrying to Anne Ponsarde, with whom he had 6 descendants. He wrote an almanac for 1550, and as a result of its success, continued writing them for future years as he began working as an astrologer for various wealthy patrons. He suffered from severe gout towards the end of his life, which eventually developed into edema. In late June of 1566, he summoned his lawyers to draw up an extensive will bequeathing his property plus 3,444 crowns, which is around 300,000 American in today's currency, minus a few debts, to his wife pending her remarriage, in trust for her sons pending their 25th birthdays and her daughters pending their marriages. On the evening of July the 1st, he's alleged to have told his secretary, Jean de Chavigny, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." And what do you know? The next morning, he was reportedly found dead, lying on the floor next to his bed and a bench. He was buried in the local Franciscan chapel in Salon, but reinterred during the French Revolution in the Collégiale Saint-Laurent, where his tomb remains to this day. In a quintessential Nostradamus quatrain, he calls out whoever would dare disturb his tomb, "He who will open the tomb found, and will come to close it promptly, evil will come to him, and one will be unable to prove if it would be better to be a Breton or a Norman king." A report from York University goes into detail about what just kinda happened when the tomb of Nostradamus was disturbed in 1793. In the heart of the French Revolution, French soldiers went after the fabled tomb, ignoring the supposed rumor that whoever opens the tomb would be, killed. It's said that the soldier who opened the tomb found a sign around Nostradamus' neck that predicted the exact date. After drinking wine out of his skull, the soldier was then killed by a stray bullet. Hey, that's what you get for messing with the wishes of the dead, my dude. Number 1, Mexico City mummies. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History says the appearance of fungal growth on a traveling display is causing concern, and rightfully so. Known as the mummies of Guanajuato, the exhibit made an appearance in the United States in 2009. But it was like a recent stop in Mexico City, showing off 6 mummies in glass cases that has led the Institute to alert the public, especially considering they don't know just how airtight those glass display cases really are, and that they're without warnings or safeguards against biohazards. From some of the published photos, at least one of the corpses on display, which was inspected in November of 2021, shows signs of a proliferation of possible fungus colonies. Now, if you remember the infections that have emerged from other tombs as revenge, I'm calling that for this one as well. Experts believe the 19th or 20th century corpses were unintentionally mummified as a possible byproduct of the mineral-rich environment, an airtight, dry underground burial vault, or some other environmental cause. Some of the mummies still have hair, skin, and even preserved clothing, but there's an obvious lack of embalming or other common mummification products. In the early 1900s, the poses and marketing of the mummy exhibit took on a distinct horror element. Some of the bodies were positioned with arms folded across chest and jaws in an open position to create the appearance that the mummies were screaming, which is extremely disrespectful to the dead. In February of 2022, an effort was launched to begin identifying the mummies, but nothing yet. While it isn't an obvious curse like some of the other spots I've spoken about today, I have a feeling any day now we're gonna learn more. And that brings us to the end of our time, and once again, I'm gonna emphasize this, leave the dead alone. Seriously, resting in peace ain't just a figure of speech.